Today I'm going to take you through my 5-step process for successful printing on vellum paper. I'll demonstrate by actually printing a sheet, so I'll go through all of the steps before printing, the printing itself, showing you my printer, and also what to do afterwards once you've printed the sheet. And I will also share lots of other tips and lessons that I've learned from basically just having a play. So I will share a few of my troubleshooting tips in particular, so things that I got wrong, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes and you can avoid wasting your supplies and your time. And also stick around to the end, because I've made quite a few things with my little bits of vellum, like this pocket that's decorated on the inside of a trifold. I made a few of those. I've decorated some little envelopes. These look really cute. I've got some super cute side pockets, and also I made the front of a junk journal, so something a bit like this. I've made a cover that would go on there, so I'll show you these in just a little bit of detail towards the end. So the first thing we need to do in our 5 steps to print something as utterly beautiful as this, isn't that absolutely gorgeous, is to find some vellum either in your stash or buy some. And I thought I'd look at this step first because it can be quite expensive, and I spent quite some time finding this particular set. So I have bought a set of 50 sheets, and I found these on Amazon, and it is quite different from tracing paper, but I thought we could just take a moment to show you that, because one of the things to not do is think that they are the same. Tracing paper is a fair bit cheaper. This is 53 GSM vellum, and this looks incredibly similar, doesn't it? So this I also bought on Amazon. So this is tracing paper. Both of these sheets are A4 in size, so approximately 29.7 centimetres by 21. Just to show you, this is the tracing paper. This is unbelievably thin, and it has a shiny side and a noticeably duller side. The vellum is not sticking there, not as lightweight. I think it's less creasable. This looks a bit whiter, and I think once you pick up a piece of tracing paper, you'll see that this would be very, very difficult to manage feeding through a printer. So one of the first tips I have is, in step 1, don't be tempted to think that tracing paper is a cheaper alternative. I need to move that, don't I? And the other tip I have when you're finding or looking for your vellum is to think about the size that you want to buy. Obviously you can acquire different weights, so some that are more robust, and I guess the more robust the easier it will be to go through your printer. But most important, I think, is that you get a piece of vellum that is the same size as the piece of paper that you're going to feed through your printer. So if your pieces of paper are, if let's say you're in the US and you're not working with standard A4 paper, you might be working with a different size, you want to buy a piece of vellum that is as close to that size as possible. The other thing I would share when I was buying my vellum is, in the description box on Amazon, the piece of vellum paper wasn't exactly the same size as A4. It was close by a millimetre or 2 either side, but I couldn't find one that claimed it was exactly the right size, so I went with it and I made it work. And I'll give you some tips in a minute for doing the best you can with the vellum that you can get, perhaps from Amazon, to feed through your printer. So I paid for this set of, let's get the right one, I paid for my set of 50 sheets £5.99, which is just around the $8 mark if you're working in US dollars. So I hope that helps you find vellum cost effectively. What I'll do is take a piece out and show you exactly what I do to prepare it to feed through the printer. This is the printer that I'll be using today. It's an Epson and the particular model is 3750. I've had it a couple of years and I use it for all of my printing of images, anything at all. The paper just goes in the bottom here, and I use a brand called Navigator, and the type is bright white 90 GSM. I need one piece of that for adhering to my vellum. And I'm also going to pull this little tray out here. This is where the vellum will sit once it's printed and come through the printer. So I'm just going to pull that out and let that sit there. So let's have a go at actually sticking some vellum onto that piece of paper so we can create a beautiful print. So step 2 is indeed sticking your vellum to the piece of printer paper that you use in your printer, and we need to line up the edges very neatly. And this is one of the tips I've got for, let's basically saying, not getting it wrong and wasting some of your prints. So take your piece of vellum, and if you can see a shiny side, and I'm not sure that I can always tell the difference, but make the shiny side be the side that's going to stick to your piece of printer paper or copy paper. And what I like to do is take some glue as opposed to tape, it's just what I prefer, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the edge of my vellum, and I'm using a very, very light hand. I'm going as close to the edge as I possibly can. It's not something you'll particularly be able to see on camera, but trust me, I'm going just to the edge, light-handed. Let's get that out of the way. And I'm going all the way round. I'm not going to go in the centre of the vellum. I don't want any sticky marks to be visible there. But I do want some glue all the way round. This glue actually is something I'm running a test on, some glues. So if you're interested in finding out more about different glues, do subscribe. So this is again from Amazon, not incredibly sticky and not as sticky as the Pritt glue that I do often use. But I'm going to take it and, as accurately as possible, put this on top of my piece of paper, lining up corner to corner. And every millimetre counts, my lesson is. So line that up. If you get it wrong, peel off and just get it straight. It's not always the easiest. Take it down the side, and it's at this point you'll realise that whatever size they've told you it is, there's a little bit of margin of error I find in the sizing. So let me just talk about how to help yourself, given that sometimes these are not absolutely 100% the size that it says. What we're going to do is feed this through our printer, and wherever your most tidy side is, I'm going to put a tiny bit more glue here, feed that through your printer so that it goes into the print area first. So I've done my best to get it as tidy and neat as possible, just sticking to this piece of paper. So I would feed this end through so that it goes through first, and for my printer I need to turn all of this upside down. So however your printer works, think about feeding a really neat edge through first, and obviously think about which way up this needs to be. So my glue is not too sticky. It's not actually going to bind the vellum to the paper, but equally I'm going to work relatively quickly once it's printed so it doesn't all stick together. So let's put this into the printer and also perhaps talk about the sort of images that you might want to use for printing on vellum. So to put my piece of paper in, I just pull out my drawer, take my now double sheet and feed it in, and for me, as I said, that's vellum side down. And I'm going to make sure that all of these little pieces of paper in here are as neat and tidy as possible to help with the paper feeding through. Just shut that up and push it in. There we go. Let's have a little chat about the kind of patterns that you might want to print. So I've got two examples of images that I think work particularly well. If you wanted something with a pattern that goes all the way to the edge, then I think this sort of design works well. And the reason I say that is because the colour is not too dark or deep. So you have, in fact, on this one, this is a piece from Tracy Fox's Compendium collection. You've got images which come out really nice and crisp and clear, and they're not hidden by having a really, really dark background, and it prints all the way to the edge. The downside with printing all the way to the edge is if you do get any of these little aberrations, and it is possible, I've got a bit of ink here and I'll tell you how that happened, you will then get that on your image. So an alternative is to maybe print some images and have some fun with something like this. So this is a collection of absolutely gorgeous images from Victoria Designs. So you've got 1, 2, 3, you've got 8 images, different sizes, and when they print you've still got that gorgeous vintage brown, the sepia, the dark vanilla here, which I think really works well with the vellum, and I'll show you how it works well on the examples of things I've made. The other thing I'd say is you get a bit of a border with a collection of images like this. So if you do get a bit of ink on the edge, you're not going to see that when you use the image. It comes out really beautifully crisp. The other thing I'd say is because this is a bit time consuming, you're going to feed your pieces of paper through your vellum individually. You maybe want to get a few images per sheet. So to use something like this, maybe on the trifold that are made or on that little envelope, means you're going to have lots to cut out and play with per sheet that you print. So I particularly am keen on this, and I've been making lots of things with it. So those are some considerations about which image to print. Shall we have a go at printing and see if we can actually do this? So the image is printed on the left, it looks like it's been successful, and I'm just going to let it wait for 2 minutes while it dries, which is one of my tips. Don't be too keen to take it off that little resting place and separate it from the paper too early. It will smudge. In fact, I said I would give you some of my little troubleshooting tips. I've got smudges on this one, they don't look too bad, but I took my vellum piece off the backing paper too soon and the ink hadn't dried, so it takes longer to dry than it would do on normal paper. So that's one thing to think about. Another troubleshooting tip, or something to be very wary of, is as your vellum feeds through, to the extent that it's not lined up perfectly on the paper, it'll be just having a little bit of a challenge to feed through, and you might find that you get these little bits of black ink at the corners, or you get a piece of vellum that's rippled a bit, so a little bit of a fold. And I think in my experience, to fix those things, or indeed to prevent them, you want to be as careful as you can at lining up your vellum on the paper. I would suggest that you do put glue all the way round. I tried just putting a little bit of glue on some of the sides and it didn't work as well. And when I did put my vellum on and it wasn't perfectly lined up, I really did have trouble. So in fact, let's see if I can find one where it didn't work as well. So just being very honest, in fact this was one where I was being really brave, and at the beginning I tried to feed just the vellum through without the paper. So if you're thinking that you can avoid the time-consuming step of gluing the vellum to the paper, mine did this. It sort of got 2/3 of the way through and then stopped for some reason and just chucked it out. On this one I have got a little bit of glue ink down here too. I got better at it. I was more careful with my glue, and as I say, you don't want a really sticky glue, because after 2 minutes, which is what we're going to do now, we can actually detach the vellum from the backing paper. And I've smudged this one, so it's not perfect, but let's see what we can do to just peel that off. this is what happens when you're doing things on camera. I would say if you've got some tips for printing on vellum, let's share them. I've been really naughty too, and I've ripped a bit at the top, so keeping it very real. I think it's because I perhaps left it a little bit too long with the glue drying on the paper, but I've got some absolutely gorgeous images to use here. Let me show you some of the things I have been doing when I tear these down and use them in my junk journaling. In fact, let's take one that's dry and I'll show you how I tear it down. Might be easiest with white behind. So I take a ruler and I tear these because I think you get a better result than cutting. Really, really easy to tear. I like the jaggedy edge that you get, and it's incredibly satisfying actually. So I'm just going to put my ruler on the divide, press down and pull up, and I think you get such a nice result. And easy, it's really easy. Easier than I think getting a pair of scissors out. I would get my scissors out for an edge that's left over here. And I've made quite a lot of things actually. Let me show you just one or two of them. So the first thing I did was just take one of those little images and sew around 3 sides. And it makes this, I put it on a book page, it makes this gorgeous little pocket that you can fill with all sorts of different little bits of ephemera. And what's incredibly beautiful about this vellum is you see the book page print behind. So I also had a go at making a junk journal cover, just a little bit inspired by the one that I used for Junk Journal January recently. I've been filling that. So I took a book page and just did a bit of layering. So I've got a few little bits of ephemera behind and a label. This is a gorgeous piece of book page from a vintage Dickens book, I think it is, and beautiful font. So I've gone around with a small running stitch in just a pale thread, and I would add that onto a probably craft cardstock again to make a junk journal cover. I made these super easy little envelope pockety things. So I've used a little image here and then added some see-through washi and labels, and again I've just sewn around that. So these are incredibly quick and super cute. But the thing that I thought worked probably most of all is a trifold I had a go at. So literally taking a book page and doing some collage. The point of difference I think in this one is this stunning image. I even like the texture and the crinkle. So I've used the butterfly image, sewn it onto a book page, which I've made into a pocket here. And then I've just made up a little trifold with a pocket and other things in it. So really easy to do. I made up a batch actually, so you can see one here. All of those different designs seem to work incredibly well, particularly with bold book pages and font behind. Isn't that gorgeous? So this is my attempt to share my best efforts about successful printing on vellum paper. Come back and see how I make these. I'm going to make these in a couple of weeks, and let me know your top tips for printing on vellum too, and I really hope to see you soon.